Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Imperfect Podcast. I'm your host, Kirsten Pfeiffer, and I am joined today by my dear friend, Lauren Smolka, who we were just joking before this because we have like a problem with people saying right away, like, what do you do? So I hate to just introduce her as what she does, but we have so much in common because we're both actors. You did pageants for a while as well, right?
I did, yeah.
So she does a lot of amazing things, but even more so as an amazing person. And we've had a lot of similar life experiences. So I'm really excited to dive into that more with you today. So welcome, Lauren.
Yay, thank you for having me.
So I know like the world of pageants and the world of acting, like there's so much female competition that can surround you. And I think where we really connected was when we were talking about our stories and kind of like our past of like dealing with mean girls. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit today with you. I don't want to make any assumptions about the pageant world. Was it a place where you felt like a lot of competition, or did you feel like it was a supportive environment, or how was that for you?
Well, I think specifically with pageants, that's a very fair question to ask, and it's probably the most common question I would get asked. What was very strange about it is you would assume that. You would assume that girls would be super catty and super overly competitive to where they would hurt each other emotionally, because girls are naturally that way.
Yeah.
And if you do have that type of persona, you very quickly realize that you weren't going to win or not succeed very long.
Right.
Because in order to be successful in a field where it's just you and you don't have a team, you're essentially tearing the other girls down. So that's really, truly not going to help you, as cliche as that is. Those were the girls that really didn't succeed. And so the ones that just within life, I think when you're the most successful at healthy relationships is when you're not competitive with each other and you learn to look at competition as admiration instead. And just from a very young age, I've never really understood jealousy and being competitive with other women. I don't say that in a bragging stance. I truly just, my brain's not wired that way. And so when I did start running into just girl issues, I guess, it wasn't until years later where I realized that a lot of that was jealousy. And I didn't understand how someone who was a friend or considered my equal would be jealous. And I think a lot of men don't really understand this way of thinking, I guess, because men don't work that way. Men fight it out.
That's what I was going to say. It's like if they have a problem, like it might be cliche, but they deal with it. They punch each other, like whatever it is. But girls, it like festers and it's manipulative and it's cunning. And like that is even more, I think, painful and destructive than the physical stuff. So not condoning violence. And
I know, I was going to say that too. It did not sound like you were, but I was going to agree with that. And I was like, not condoning violence in any way, shape, or form. But there's some validity to that. Validity? Is that a word?
Validity?
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. My words are all over the place. We did the podcast we did right before this. I was like trying to say patriarchy, and I don't know. I said something that was not that word, but kind of appropriate for this conversation, but I digress.
But there's actually, you've obviously seen Mean Girls, the movie, but there's a musical based off of it that's relatively new within the last 5 years. And towards the end of the show, Janice Ian's character, she sings a song called I'd Rather Be Me. And one of the lyrics, I just pulled it up, or one of the verses rather, it says, "We're supposed to all be ladies and be nurturing and care. Is that really fair? Boys get to fight, we have to share. Here's the way that turns out. We always understand how to slap someone down with our underhand."
Wow.
And I just got the chills because, again, that's a lot of things men don't understand, is they don't understand what women have to put up with each other because they deck it out with their boys, you know, but girls are taught to, you know, be pretty and just say sorry and, you know, move on. Well, but what if you can still say sorry, but what if you have an issue with that person and you want to address it in a healthy way? I think by nature, that makes women just be more passive. And then in return, passive aggressive. So then they're not dealing with their issues. They're just kind of putting it away and then in return, they become catty and resentful. And just not actually dealing with a conflict that they might have with another female.
Right. And then you can be on like either side of that, where like you're the quote unquote mean girl that's being passive aggressive and just nasty to other women because of some insecurity you feel, or because of some pain that you're festering, or whatever it might be. And then you can also be on the receiving side of that, which I think a lot of that we both have experienced a lot. And especially like when you're still a teenager and a kid, my brain also is not wired for that. Like my mom would always say like, oh, they're just jealous. And I'm like, what? Like, what do they have to be jealous of?
Yeah.
Because also like my confidence was not at a point yet where I even thought that I was worthy of someone being jealous of. And then when you couple that with someone just saying mean things about you and you did nothing to deserve it, that further solidifies this identity of I'm unworthy. And so for me, a lot of what I've had to struggle with throughout my whole life and like kind of entering into my adulthood was those lies that were solidified in my identity from a really young age, so much so that I was not even conscious of it sometimes. And I'm getting emotional about it because I just believed that like I wasn't a good friend, that women didn't like me, that like there was something inherently wrong with me, that like girls just didn't like me. And I thought that maybe I was just a bad friend. And it's funny because my acting coach actually, the first time he ever met me when I was 18 years old, he was like, by the way, that's not your real voice. And I was like, what? Like, I was so like offended. I was like, what does that even mean?
Like your speaking voice?
Yeah. And he was like, you're using a voice that's a lot smaller than your own voice. He's like, that's not your authentic voice, because I'm sure that girls were mean to you your whole life. You never wanted anyone to be intimidated by you. So you went into this like defense mode of like, I'm just going to be the sweet, nice Kirsten so that you're not intimidated. So then my voice literally was like this because I like wanted to be small. So I didn't want people to feel intimidated by me. I'm not going to take your boyfriend. I'm nice. I'm sweet. And I was like, what? This guy's psychic. Like, how did he know?
Yeah,
but he had the reason why he's so amazing at what he does is because he's an expert on psychology, and he also has been doing this for so long. He's met so many women that have dealt with the same patterns. And so then he sent me to a voice coach who changed my life. And it was one of those like very serendipitous things because she is an actress as well. She's in her 60s now. But she looked at me and she says this now. She was like, I saw a 20-year-old me walk through the door.
Wow.
And she had the same journey with dealing with mean girls, developing a smaller voice, and then having to break through that. And our voices are so attached to our psyche, and it's such a like personal thing that as I was breaking through that barrier of like trying to find my authentic voice and actually use my full voice, because for me, my throat was literally clenching up to give me like a smaller voice. Wow. So when I tried to like open that up to use a more full voice, I started to cry, and I didn't understand why, but it's because like subconsciously it was like a defense mechanism that my body had like created for so long to keep me safe. And I only knew this because of like she had gone through the same journey, and it was such a healing thing. And I just learned so much about how the voice is such a physical manifestation of our subconscious. And then also like how grateful I was that because I'm an actress, I had that opportunity to really explore that and go deeper. But I'm like, how many other women aren't using their real voice because they're either scared of intimidating other women or scared of intimidating men? And like, this is the place, this is where you're supposed to stay. Like, and so I just, at that moment, became so passionate about like empowering not just women, but other men to like not let those constraints of like what other people have spoken over them or what society has told them they should be. Yeah. And like really find, like, not to sound cliche, but like find their authentic self.
Yeah. Well, that's so crazy about the voice being, in a sense, you were holding trauma in, I feel like, because, you know, they say when you release tension in your shoulders or sometimes even your hips, I've heard a lot of studies that people carry trauma in their hips. And when they release tension in their hips, they actually start crying.
Yeah.
It's a very similar thing. It sounds like that's.
Yeah. It's like, I remember one time in yoga, this sounds so LA of me. One time in my yoga class, but the instructor, like at the end, was having everyone do like pigeon, which is a hip opener. And she said, if you feel emotions during this, that's okay, because your hips are like your emotional lockbox. And it is, like, I've always just been so fascinated by like the mind-body connection and how trauma plays into that. And yeah, that's a whole, I can go off on this for hours.
Well, and in a way, it's really cool because it's your body protecting itself against outside forces. So it is unfortunate that it happens, but that's just also, another topic. But it's cool that our bodies know how to protect us against that. And
on that same note, like if you're having ailments in your body, a lot of times, like, that's our body like speaking to us loud and clear, you know, our body speaking to us all the time. It's like whether we listen to it or not. Yeah. And even like, I have shared this a lot in recent episodes, but I was in a car accident, had like neck and back injuries before I actually knew like what was going on. Cause I didn't think it was like a severe enough of a car crash for these things to happen, but like the whiplash created all of it. But I was having really terrible headaches, and I found out that first I had a concussion, but then after that, the discs in my C2 and C3, like in my neck, are bulging, and that's directly related to headaches. So like, I was like, why do I have these headaches? I think like my friend Cam, who's helping with cameras, I like called him because I was like, I think I have brain damage. It's like, I literally thought that I was like dying, but it just was an indication that that injury was related to my brain. If something's off, usually there actually is something there that your body's trying to tell you. So listen to your body, people.
Yeah, no, really, truly. Yeah. And just going back to how we started talking about all that, we're protecting ourselves against trauma, whether that be a car accident or something from a childhood from a mean girl at school that really hurt our feelings. Yeah. And then in return, like that continued through middle school, through high school, you know, and the saying women supporting women has become so widespread and so common nowadays. And I will admit when I first started hearing that saying, my initial reaction was, oh yeah, I mean, that's great, women supporting women, but what about men? You know, like men deserve support too. And I do feel like men do suppress a lot of their emotions. And that's another topic again for another day, the way women deal with their emotions. But furthermore, when I really started to understand more of the female psyche and how competitive we are in a way that men aren't, just with each other. Yeah. That's why that's so important, women supporting women, because we need to be reminded we are on the same team. Yeah. We're not competing against each other. Stop being jealous against each other. We're rooting for each other. Yeah. And not to say men shouldn't support men. You know, I don't think that that's what the saying means. It's just women need that reminder. Right.
And it's like you said, it's coming from a very real place. It's like, anytime you have to kind of market this like phrase, it's because there's a problem there, you know? And so it's like, it has existed for so long, and I'm glad that it's being talked about now, but I think we still have so much more work to do, because I think it's just in our nature as well. I mean, I took a class in college where it's like about our genes and like why our behaviors are like,
I thought you meant like genes.
Oh no.
Or wearing us
like genetics, like genetically speaking, like why men tend to be more of like the quote unquote playboys. Like there's a genetic evolutionary underpinning of that, which is like how much you spread your genes to the next generation. And like guys can do that a lot more quickly and prolifically, whereas women, if you get pregnant, there's a 9-month gestation period, and then you have to make sure the kid survives, right? So it's like when people say that women are more picky about guys and stuff, it comes from that place of needing, it's called paternity certainty. You need to make sure that the father of your baby is going to stay to help you in like the caveman era of like protecting you against predators while you're pregnant and all these things. And so when guys can just go and not have to worry about that, they are not as like selective, whereas women are more selective. And then there's also more competition there with other women. So it literally goes back to a genetic evolutionary standpoint. We're fighting our genes constantly. And so I think when you can be aware of that, coupled with the patriarchal society that we live in, and how like a lot of systems and people benefit from women not supporting women, right? Like, because that's how power gets harnessed, you know. And that's, again, I don't want to sound like, oh, men suck, men are great, you know.
Yeah, men are
but
awesome.
it is like there's a reason why, like, when you look at even 100 years ago, women just got the right to vote, like I think it was 100 years ago, but it's not that far off that women haven't had equal rights. So when you pair all that together, it's like we really do have to have each other's backs.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a huge rant that did not make sense. I hope it tracked.
No, it totally did.
Yeah,
it totally did. And I think it boils down to, it's really important for women to understand, you know, to like fix any problem, you have to understand where it's rooted from, where it stems from. And so as long as we understand that we're competitive, let's agree that we're competitive against each other, but we don't have to be, especially because we don't live in the caveman era. You know, we have our words and our emotions to explain and really dissect a situation and to just be kind and uplifting to one another. And in doing so, that's going to uplift you.
Absolutely.
When you tear down another woman, when you're threatened by another woman, that's when you're not going to succeed.
Right.
That's when you're not going to get the crown.
I love it. Well, and you said something earlier that like was really stuck with me, and it's that instead of jealousy, having admiration. And I think that the emotion of like feeling some kind of envy or jealousy is natural. But I think where we can flip it is, instead of festering that to like a malicious feeling towards that person, it's like, what in that is making me feel like I want what she has? And how did she get there? And maybe how can I like extend a hand or open the door or call her and be like, how did you get to where you are, right? Like, instead of festering that feeling of like jealousy, I think that there's an opportunity to ask that person how they got to where they were. Because if you're feeling jealous, it's usually because they have something that you want. And I think in that process, like, you can then not harbor those feelings of jealousy, but then also like uplift the other woman to be like, you know what, Lauren, like, how did you get to where you are? Like, that's amazing. You're doing amazing. Like, that would make you feel good, right? And so I think like the more that we can have that transparency and that communication with one another, then the less that we would feel like we need to be passive aggressive anyway, if that makes sense.
Totally. Instead of being, oh, I want what she has, let's start saying, I want to be like her.
Right.
know?
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's like a very healthy thing to have, like positive female influences in your life that you aspire to be like. But I think when we make it about me and like kind of isolate ourselves, that's where a lot of these issues stem from.
And being in Los Angeles and being an actor doesn't help either.
Right. Because it's just like the nature
it's
of
competitive. You walk into a room and there's 50 other girls who look just like you.
Right.
Well, I mean, everything's virtual now, so you don't walk into rooms anymore.
Yeah.
But,
which has been healthy, I think.
Yeah, honestly, I just kind of thought about that.
But even with that, it's like if you're going out for a role and there's like all these girls that look like you. I mean, I think La La Land does a brilliant job of depicting that in like the Emma Stone scenes. But at the end of the day, we can look exactly alike, but like we have completely different essences. And I can only bring myself to this role in a way that I can do, right? And for some roles, that's going to be right. That's going to be what the director had in mind. For other roles, like I'm just not going to be right for it, and that's okay. And so I think the more that we lean into our own like uniqueness, the less that we feel that competition, because there's just only certain roles that I'm going to be able to play. And there's only certain roles that like you're going to be able to play. Yeah. And it's like I've gotten to a point where I see my other actor friends be successful. Sometimes there is that moment of like, oh, why her? Like, I wish I had that role. But then it's like, oh, wait, that's so awesome because it's possible. That shows me that it's possible, right? Like if it's possible for you, it's possible for me. And like my time's going to come, and I want people celebrating with me when that comes. So in the meantime, I'm just going to celebrate other people. And in that process, like it makes the waiting and like the frustration of like not booking and the rejection, it makes it a lot more bearable, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that, and this sounds so cliche, but it really is so true. Our story is not the only one being written. And when we don't get a part or get a job, we forget that, especially if it's something that we really felt like we deserved or really felt like we worked so hard for. it's really easy to forget that it's not all about us. You know, even if you did rightfully deserve it, okay, but you don't know every single detail about every single person on this planet. Only God does.
Right.
You know, so only He's going to know who truly needs it. And maybe on paper, it looked like you deserved it more, but you don't know what that girl is going through and what she went through 10 years ago. If she had an eating disorder and this is now going to lead her down a path where she's not going to have that as her future anymore.
Right.
You know, and you're at a point in your life where you don't have that, or you don't need this. And there's just so many other deciding factors in something. And I think that's something that pageantry taught me when it seemed like, oh, why didn't this happen? Or why didn't I get this? Well, maybe you did deserve it, Lauren, but it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's not all about you.
So powerful.
And we forget that. We all always forget that. And it's really easy to when we're in the career path that we are in.
Right.
It's hard to forget that there's other things going on. It's hard to forget that there's other people that have the same exact goals as you.
Right.
You know, but God has an amazing way of still making what He has for us come to fruition.
Absolutely.
We forget that it's not always our plan, it's God's plan.
Right.
You know, and we can have these amazing goals and these amazing visions, but how we get there, we can't plan for.
Yeah.
That's what's always going to be different.
Right. And thank God, honestly, that like we can't plan our way there, because that is way too much pressure to bear.
Like, that's like an anxiety attack for me waiting to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Because even down to like, if I wasn't supposed to get that role, like thank God I didn't, because I know that that's protecting me and keeping me available for something else, you know? Even like down to this podcast, like if I had booked a series or whatever, like right when I got here, like I wish that I would have at the time, I wouldn't be doing this. Like I wouldn't have opened myself up to these other opportunities that I'm doing now. And so I think sometimes just being open to like whatever else is out there and just to be patient through it all and not to like project your feelings of like frustration onto other people, especially other women.
Yeah. And I think going off of that, I think that's where a lot of the competition amongst women come from. It's like, I didn't get this. Why did she get it?
Right.
You know, and it's like, because she deserved it. So why don't you just say like, congratulations?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so.
And I especially want to like speak to, I mean, I don't know how many like teenagers would be listening to this, but I feel like that was like the hardest time for me dealing with mean girls, because I just, like I said, I didn't believe it myself that girls could be jealous of me, but I also didn't see any way out. And so whether it's a teenager or someone in their 20s or someone in their 50s, like dealing with that right now, like what helped get you through those times of dealing with the gossip and the nastiness and all of that?
Well, first of all, I think it is important to realize that it happens just to women across the board. Like I know women in their 50s and 60s who have gone into an office where they work and have dealt with women being catty. I didn't really fully realize what was happening until probably my late 20s. And then I do know it is where it becomes most prominent is when you're a teenager and when you're in high school. I think what really got me out of it was, and I know we've touched on this, but was just realizing that is coming from a place of hurt from them and frustration from them. And it's all about how I react to the situation. And it took time. It took like a lot of really painful relationships to unfold. And it honestly took a couple girls coming to me years later and saying, Lauren, I'm really sorry. I was jealous. And I just remember being kind of like, oh. Yeah. Oh. And it doesn't have to mean, oh, I'm jealous from the way you look. Oh, I'm jealous because A, B, and C. I'm just jealous because I wasn't where you were is all it has to mean. Yeah. And I think just realizing it took me time to realize how women work. So it didn't really hit me until my 20s. And then I looked back and I'm like, oh, this in high school. Oh, this in middle school. Yeah. Oh, that's what that was. Right. I get it. Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, I think anyone going through it, sometimes it does just take like years later and like in retrospect to realize it. And maybe that's not super encouraging to someone that might be going through that.
But I think like the more that people do share their stories, which is why I'm so grateful that you're on here and like able to be open and vulnerable about it. It's like, I don't know that people were necessarily talking about like these issues when I was a teenager this openly, or I mean, it was just like a different time. Like it was kind of just the beginning of social media, and that's a whole other thing. Like I have so much respect and empathy for teenagers these days, because I'm like, the stuff that we dealt with is just like, must be like magnified now with how much social media has,
and it's like we as adults are overwhelmed now with social media and everything. How the heck do teenagers feel right now?
Right.
I can't even fathom.
No.
Like I had a flip phone in high school.
I just like, our brains were not meant, and we're not built to process that much information. I mean, our pastor Judah Smith has talked about this a lot recently. It's like one of the qualities of God is that he's omniscient. He's all knowing. Yeah. We were not created to be all-knowing. That was to protect us. But now we're like in a place in our world, because of the information age and the access to current events happening like that, and seeing so many people and coming across many more people on the internet than we ever would see in our whole lives. We've kind of reached that point where like we are almost all-knowing, right? And it's like we know way more than we're meant to process. And it's like, how do I handle that? It's like, well, you actually weren't meant to handle that. So I think that's where we can then be intentional about like setting boundaries with ourselves for social media, realizing this is actually not reality. It's having access to all these, like, I'm not supposed to carry this, you know?
Yeah.
And that's helped me a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's on social media specifically, that's where so many girls feel so competitive. You know, I've had friends who've said that they've had to delete their social media just for however long time it may be, because they're just like, I'm realizing I'm looking at my friends as competition. And they didn't say that in a bad way. They were just like, you know what? I'm realizing I'm looking at my friends as competition, and that's not right. So I'm going to take a step back and reanalyze that.
Right. But that takes maturity. And it's like, that's what I'm worried about with teenagers. It's like, it takes a while to like get to that point where you can have that perspective. And I don't know what the solution is here.
And it's just like, just to go back to, I love the movie Mean Girls. I think it's brilliant because it kind of reminds me of Legally Blonde in the sense of like, it seems just so lighthearted and just girly and pink and all the fun things, but it has some like deep rooted issues in how women treat each other and in high school specifically, you know? And I think that looking at stories like that and realizing, as cliche as it might sound, you know, I say that a lot in life, is as cliche as it sounds. And I'm like, okay, well then I think life is cliche, right? Because this is life, and this is true. And this
I say that all the time too. I'm like, but no, like it is.
It is true. It's cliche, but it's true. So then life is cliche and cheesy, so that's fine. But yeah, just realizing that, take that as is and take it as advice, and realize that we're not here to compete against each other. We're here to love each other, and that's the only way we're all going to succeed. It's cliche. Right. It's okay.
Well, like, not to mention, I mean, just if you think about it, like, pragmatically. Yeah. If you book a series right now, and we're just using this because, like, we're both actors as our example, but, like, whatever that might be for you, like, that I should be happy for you and rooting for you, because, like, the access to, like, connections that you then have, not that I'm gonna use you, but I'm just like, the way that I think of it, it's like my people, like, we're all gonna raise up together. Like, the second that I have an open door, I want to pull everyone through it. Like, and I know the people I surround myself with, I know they have those same hearts. So I'm like, why would we not be rooting for each other? Like, there's so much strength in numbers. So why are we trying to isolate ourselves? And again, I think that comes from a scarcity mentality. And why do women feel a scarcity mentality? Because historically, there have been less opportunities for women. And there has been like this narrative of like, oh, you have to compete with other women for your husband or whatever it is. And then you get into this scarcity mentality of, oh, I need this opportunity just for me. I can't let anyone else into it. And that not only produces anxiety, it produces competition, and it's just not as fun.
And shutting yourself off to love.
Right.
Like, you know, shutting yourself off to a possible friendship.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like I've been guilty of that in the past, just specifically, there's just been times in my life where I've realized or thought, oh, weird as it sounds, like, oh, I have enough friends. I'm not really interested in making more friends. And realizing that I had that mentality because I had been hurt by so many friends and by so many girls. Right. And it took me years to realize this, but I was afraid to let more friends in because I'd been betrayed so many times. Yeah. Or not even like directly betrayed, just realized that the friends in my life who we both kind of took a step back from each other with were people that just couldn't give me what I needed at that point in my life in a friendship. Yeah. And that's kind of going off on another topic, but I think it's like our friend Kristen, her and I have talked about this before, how a friendship breakup is almost more hurtful than a relationship breakup with a man, because I think with a friendship breakup with a woman, you don't even, as weird as that sounds, you don't really have that official breakup conversation. Right. Like you just stop talking, you know, like it's very strange. And when you have that friendship with a woman, the amount of trust that you have, unspoken trust. Yeah. Whereas when you're in a relationship, it's with a man, it's more, okay, you talk about, I'm just rambling now.
No, I'm tracking because I'm like, I've been there. I think that when we are in a relationship with a man, there's an expectation, and I was talking about this in my episode with Cam, like it can go one of two ways. We get married or we break up. Yes. Either way, you are preparing, and I think you have certain boundaries within that or hopefully if it's like a healthy relationship of like, there's only so much that I'm going to share with you as my boyfriend until you get access as my husband to these other parts of me and my heart and whatever that is. And with a friend, I feel like it's like, again, this is going to sound cliche, but it's like a sisterhood, right? Like you're like, for my friends, I'm like, those are my sisters, those are my family. And there aren't maybe as many boundaries there because there's vulnerability and there's intimacy. And that's a beautiful thing in friendship. Yeah. We're not preparing ourselves to break up with those friends, but inevitably friendships go through ebbs and flows. And so there might be a time where that person's going to exit your life unexpectedly, maybe because of some kind of dramatic thing, or maybe just because you go into different directions, or like we're constantly growing, right? Some other people aren't constantly growing. And so sometimes you do outgrow friends, or they outgrow you, or whatever. Like we're all on different trajectories. Yeah. But that like separation is still painful, right? Because like we were saying, like the point of life, I think, is like relationship and friendship. And if that's what our souls like really identify with, there's like a mourning there that happens and like a loss. And when you've shared so many things vulnerably with people, I never even really thought about that in the way that like breakups with female friends can be a lot more painful than like,
and I kind of, with what you were saying, it's like when you're not prepared, because when you make friends, you don't think, oh, we're not going to be friends someday. Like we're either going to commit our lives to each other, or we're just not going to be friends. Yeah. You kind of assume you're going to be, that person is, when you're really close, that you're going to be in each other's lives forever. Right. And then that kind of brings me to think, like, to realize I've met so many girlfriends who've had multiple falling outs with like the same friend over and over and over again. And there comes a point in time where I'm just like, I don't think I should be that hard. Yeah. Like maybe you should walk away from this friendship, or have a mutual discussion to where, is this beneficial to both of you at this point? It might hurt like a breakup does, but is this healthy? Yeah. Kind of seems toxic to me. Right.
And when we were talking about this before we started recording, when I've been hurt by friends continually over and over and over again for the same pattern, in that spirit of, well, this seems toxic, why am I going to keep doing the same thing? I'm going to distance myself. Yeah. But then I'm like, but maybe now I'm doing the thing that I was accusing the other person of doing, of like not being a great friend. And I think we have a choice. It's like either, like maybe like separate ourselves from that friendship, or have you talked to that person about it? Yeah. I think so many times we want to avoid conversations because it feels like a confrontation, and anytime there's any kind of tension, it's uncomfortable. I actually had this conversation with like this 10-year-old that I tutor. Her one friend, she's like, I don't like her anymore. And she like gets over her friends and then she makes a new friend. You know, like you get to a certain point where like you reach a level of familiarity with someone that you start to get annoyed with them because you're accessing new parts of each other, right? And seeing your true selves. And I think in order to go to like the next level of like depth of friendship, sometimes you have to have that conflict and have a conversation about it, which obviously like a 10-year-old doesn't have this perspective. But I was trying to like tell her this. It's like, that's because she's like your sister at this point. You get annoyed with your sister all the time, but then you guys make up, but you guys yell at each other because you feel comfortable. Like you have that comfortability where you're okay to have that. You yell it out, you hug, and then you go like, why are you so close with your sister, right? Yeah. And so I think we also have this like level of like politeness to us of like
with friendships
because you're actually not my sister. So does that make sense?
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
But I think in order to get to the next level of like intimacy, whether it be in a romantic relationship or a friendship, you have to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I've been in friendships in the past, one specifically that comes to mind, where we never addressed conflict. And the one time that major conflict presented itself in our friendship, it was something that we really needed to deal with and could not avoid. And I remember like oddly being so excited that we had addressed that, okay, yeah, we have a problem. Let's talk about it. Because I knew that talking about that conflict was ultimately going to get us over that hump.
Right.
Because we were hitting a wall. And something wasn't right. And I wanted so desperately to be closer to this person, so desperately like to love her and have her let me in more. And I knew the only way that was going to happen is if we fought. Right.
Sometimes you just got to lay it all on the table.
Yeah. And that just ties back to what we said in the beginning about females just being passive.
Right.
Like stop being passive. Talk about your issues and what you have with each other. Yeah. Be sweet, be kind about it, you know? And then if you do keep hitting a wall after you've addressed conflict, it's okay to not be friends.
Right.
If you think that's a good place for both of you.
And I think sometimes like when we know that we have to address a situation, the idea of the conversation and how it's going to possibly go wrong is so much more stressful than the actual conversation. And so I like put it off and I put it off and I put it off. But then the anxiety that I get every time I think about it, or anytime I think of that person, or anytime I interact with that person, it just compounds and gets worse and worse and worse. And then you finally have that conversation and it's like, whew, like such a burden.
Like,
I'm like,
why did I
put myself through this? I think our minds and our anxiety convinces us that it's easier to avoid.
Totally. And that's a sign of like, I think in our day and age, because we're constantly anxious, because we have access to all this information and competitiveness at our fingertips, you know, we're more depressed and anxious by nature as a society. And so because of that, that's not dealing with conflict and putting things aside can sometimes just mean that person's depressed.
Right.
Because they can't deal with that. That's going back to what you said about trauma, like you're tightening your voice. Like that's, that you it's too much for your body to deal with. It's too much for your mind to deal with. And so, but when you realize that when you're avoiding something, it probably means that you're depressed about something, whether it be what you're avoiding or anxious about what you're avoiding or something else in your life, that means even more you need to force yourself to deal with it because that's ultimately going to help you move past it.
Right.
You're not going to move past it if you keep pushing it down and keep pushing it down and being passive.
Yeah. And even with another element of social media is that we're hiding behind our screens. We're not forced to have this in-person interaction all the time with each other. It's easier to say passive aggressive things behind a screen. Awareness of that, then we can be intentional of like, oh, like I'm avoiding this. It's easier for me to avoid this because I'm like behind a screen. Let me face this head on because it's actually going to bring so much more freedom and release so much more anxiety. And again, like everything is situational. There's some people that are toxic and you should just remove them from your life. But I think that's where you have to have discernment.
Totally. And that's where not only discernment, but good accountability in your life, good community of friends that you really do trust.
Right.
a therapist, you know, like people that really can guide you in the correct direction of how to handle a friendship and a relationship. Ultimately, I think relationships are complicated and it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I read something the other day. Oh, I think it was a meme. What did it say? It said most people, or when you think about it, people who are in therapy because they're talking about people who won't go to therapy.
So true.
And so I think when we all realize we're all dealing, at the end of the day, we're all dealing with the same stuff. We all have the same insecurities. We all have the same desire to be loved and seen and wanted. And when we realize that, that's when the competitiveness and the jealousy is going to go out the window.
Right.
To start loving each other and lifting each other up and just watch things start to fall into place for you. Because when you're competitive and jealous against someone, what does that do to you? Resentment, jealousy to you. And that's going to fester, that's going to boil, and you're just not a happy person.
Right. And even like as you're talking about that, it's like the image I get is someone just like white knuckling, like holding everything so tight. And it's like that's person is trying to control and protect, right? Like ultimately that's what it is. And if you have your fist is like closed like that, you can't receive anything with the closed fist. Again, cliche,
that's
but it's
a good
like
analogy.
Yeah, it's like the more that you can live freely and extend that like grace and love to others, that doesn't mean you're not going to get hurt. Oh, you are going to get hurt, right?
Totally.
But I think like it's so far and few between in comparison to like the joy and the freedom that you'll experience from just living like open-handedly, you know?
Totally. And God tells us it's not going to be easy,
Yeah.
you know? So like going through conflict and walking through that fire, that ultimately the only way to go past the trauma, the competitiveness, the jealousy is to walk through the fire, be in pain, not be in pain. Of course, God doesn't make us be in pain, but he does promise that if we do walk through that, it's that much better on the other side. Because the only way to get better is to walk through your problems, deal with your issues. And when you confront a fellow female about issues that you may be having, just watch not just your relationship get better, but your inner being get better.
Yeah. And like with the fire thing, it's like, and God says this in the Bible, it's like he talks about like silver going through the fire. And you think of in life, things, in order for things to be refined, they have to go through the fire when you're talking about metal. And everything that we go through as humans, I think is reflected in nature a lot if we look for it.
Totally.
And it's not any surprise that like we see that in the process of refining. Is it iron or silver or gold? I get confused. Anyhow, walking through the fire can sometimes be a good thing.
Yes.
Just don't do it. Like, don't put your hand on the stove is all I'm going to say. But if you do, you'll learn some things. You know, sometimes you have to get burned to learn some things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Okay, so we talked about a lot today.
We did.
I'm inspired and sometimes you forget like, oh, other people go through this stuff. So I just really appreciate everything that you've shared today. And if you could leave people with one thing, what would it be?
Fellow people, not even fellow people, no. Whether that be a female or a male, doesn't matter. Just stop looking at each other as competition.
Yeah.
We're all humans. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
And again, what we talked about sounds cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah.
And when you start leading your life with love and not jealousy, not resentment, just watch that you win.
Yeah.
Or
so
watch your life start to be what God intended it to be for you.
So good. But where can people find you if you like on Instagram? What's your handles, all the things?
I think I'm most active on Instagram. So just Lauren Smolka on Insta.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren.
Yay.
And thank you everyone for joining. We will see you next week.